Have you ever listened to a song when you were a kid and thought it was the best song, but then you play it as an adult and you're like, that song sucks. But if you listen to the words, they're appropriate. Anyway, my name is James Inciardi. I've been a respiratory therapist for 6 years, but I've been in the medical field for 18 years, and currently I work at the Rocky Mountain Regional VA Medical Center in Aurora, Colorado. Today, I'm going to talk about communication and teaching with patients who have low or non-literacy status. Okay, and here are my objectives. By the end of this video, you should be able to describe the importance of identifying patients with low or non-literate status, describe what changes to make in your communication when teaching these patients, describe teaching strategies recommended, and also discuss the use of learning styles when teaching these patients. So before I go further, I'm just going to review the case study we worked off of. Here it goes. Working in the medical office with a physician's assistant, you are aware that patients come from a variety of different backgrounds, ethnicities, and cultures. One day while you're at work, you meet 80-year-old Mr. Johnson, who is now retired after working many years in construction. While reviewing his history, you note that he has several chronic diseases, including hypertension, hyperlipidemia, and kidney disease. You also note that his hypertension is not well controlled. Speaking with Mr. Johnson, you find that his affect is quiet and somber. He only answers questions in 1 or 2 words responses, and often he appears confused when you ask him if he has any questions. He replies, "I'm a little embarrassed to say it, but you've been using a lot of words I don't understand." Then you politely apologize to Mr. Johnson, as you were unaware that he was not comprehending much of what you were trying to explain. How big of a problem is literacy in the United States? Well, I recently read a piece in the New York Times that described someone who was illiterate. She would ride the subway every day with a newspaper in front of her because she didn't know how to read. But she was so embarrassed about her inability to read that she would have this newspaper in front of her just so that it would look like she was not illiterate. When you're communicating with someone who is illiterate, it is unlikely that you will ever even know it. People who are illiterate don't like to eagerly tell everyone that they can't comprehend written language or medical jargon. Instead, they will suffer in silence. Unfortunately, the average American can only read at a 9th grade level. People in 2 to 4 year schools, colleges, can communicate at a much higher level than that. So it's likely that our speech, while perfectly clear to us, is unintelligible to others. People who are illiterate tend to need health services more often. They also draw the highest healthcare costs. They are readmitted more often, and tragically, their children of illiterate parents also suffer the same afflictions. Here are a few myths that you should know about among those who are illiterate. Myth number 1 is that they're stupid. In truth, many have average to above average IQ ratings. Myth number 2 is that they can be recognized by their appearance somehow, and that doesn't make any sense, does it? Appearance alone is unreliable. There's no appearance that can reliably tell that somebody is illiterate. Myth number 3 is completion of school correlates with literacy. But in truth, school years completed overestimates reading ability by 4 or 5 grades. Myth number 4 is that most illiterate people are foreign-born or poor or minority. But the truth is that most illiterate Americans are from diverse backgrounds. In fact, the majority are white and native-born. And the last myth that I will discuss is that they will admit that they don't understand or can't read. And I just talked about that with my description about the woman in the subway. They won't really like to advertise that. So, how do you identify someone who is illiterate? Well, because they try to do their best to hide their illiteracy, it can be hard to discover that someone can't read. Here are a few clues to determining if someone is illiterate. Remember, someone who's illiterate will almost never come out and announce that they can't read. Someone who can read but can't understand medical jargon might equally be silent. That's why it's important to speak in plain, everyday English when speaking to anyone, literate or not, because you really can't tell who really is literate and who isn't. Remember my story about the New York City subway? The woman who opened her newspaper so people couldn't tell she's illiterate. See, they'll go through a lot to make sure that they can hide their illiteracy. Once you've figured out that someone has a literacy problem, you can change your communication style a little bit. Here are a few things you need to do to make sure that you're instructing them in a way that they can comprehend. First, and most importantly, you have to establish a trusting relationship with the patient. If you don't accomplish this step, no teaching will be effective. You can start by trying to get to know the patient on a more personal level. Second, use the smallest amount of information possible to accomplish the predetermined behavioral objectives. Stay within the most important points. Don't overwhelm the patient with extraneous information. Number 3, make points of information as vivid and explicit as possible. Explain everything in common living room language. Avoid medical jargon as much as you can. Even literate patients might not understand some medical jargon. Fourth, teach one step at a time. This goes back to what I was saying before about not overwhelming your patient with too much information at once. Go to the next slide. Number 5, use multiple teaching methods and instructional tools requiring fewer literacy skills. Obviously, handing them a pamphlet is not going to be very effective. You have to communicate with them differently, explain them verbally, demonstrate it, draw pictures. Using text will only discourage them. 6, allow patients the chance to restate information in their own words and demonstrate any procedures being taught. Use teach-back teaching. That's been shown to be really effective, and you'll know if they've grasped the information by what they teach you back, and see if you need to do more teaching. Okay, number 7, keep motivation high. If they can't work through their problems, they're going to get discouraged and give up. And don't let that happen. This could be their only chance for the patient to get this information before they go back into their suffering under silence and just pretending they understand. Number 8, build in coordination procedures. This means tailoring and cueing. Tailoring means associating new behaviors with old tasks, like coordinating medication administration with meal times, for example. Cueing means making the behavior on an appropriate time and situation. That would mean like making a chart or putting medication someplace where they can't be missed. And then the last one is to use repetition to reinforce information. At the right levels, repetition can be a great way to teach and reinforce information. So now we'll go to learning styles. You've probably heard how people are auditory learners, visual learners, or tactile learners. Well, you want to appeal to as many of these styles as possible. As I discussed before, written material is not going to be very helpful, so you have to stick with drawings and verbal communications and demonstrations. If you're lucky, the patient will want to dig in even deeper and find out more information about the disease or medication. That's why it's a good idea to actually sit the patient down in front of a computer and show them how to get to a site like YouTube, and that way they can find information on their own at home. So, wrapping it up, illiteracy is a lot more common than most people think. Most Americans read at around 9th grade level, and about 20% read at 5th grade level or below. Illiteracy is associated with more hospital visits, more readmissions, and more expensive medical requirements. So teaching is really, really important. It's hard to identify people who are illiterate, but once identified, teaching has to happen following the guidelines I described earlier. Remember what we talked about? Establishing a trusting relationship, using the smallest amount of information possible, make points of information as vivid and explicit as possible, teach one step at a time, use multiple teaching methods, allow patients the chance to restate information in their own words, keep motivation high, build in coordination procedures like tailoring and cueing, and use repetition to reinforce information. All right, and here are my references. And that brings my presentation to an end. If you have any questions, here's my email and my phone number. Thank you very much for your attention.